I worked for the government for 80 years and there is something you need to know. Part 2. There is something I need to get off my chest. I used to work for the government. I have been labeled a whistleblower. The things I have seen and done keep me awake at night. A few years ago, my computer was hacked and my journals were leaked to the internet. Having dealt with them in the past, I contacted the Paranoid Time Artifact Society. They moved me to one of their outposts that studies research in meteorology, psychology, parapsychology, zoology, and electromagnetism. My journals were uploaded to the internet, however they were not finished. With the help of Paranoid Times, we have reworked them and reposted them for you, dear listener. Because there is something you need to know. When I say I worked for the government for 80 years, I am 80 years old. When you are born into a world that is ruled by the government, your birth. The time you first see the doctor's eye, or feel your mother's touch. You are employed by the government, you have a number. A identifier that sets you apart from others. Now back to our story. Chapter 6: Lovers in Dangerous Space-Time. When you're hanging out with a tribe of Nazi acid heads, magical space love doesn't even register on the weirdo-meter. I mean, they talked about so much weird shit, and so much of it was total bullshit, that I didn't pay any fucking attention to it. It was the 60s. Talking about magical space love was like asking somebody how their day went. It was just conversation to me. But to them it wasn't. That was a strange time in my life. I had spent the last 6 months going from commune to commune, just checking them out. They were all bullshit. Every one of them was just some guy on a power trip and a bunch of women who grown up with bad fathers hanging on his every word, hoping he would solve all their problems. That's the only way the commune system worked. The guy got control of the women, and the women attracted a few guys to do the manual labor, but in the end it was basically just a new system of pimping. I mean, I'm from Brooklyn. I've seen pimping. These chicks had tried to escape society and just gotten themselves pimped out. It was tragic. But too tragic for me to give a shit about it. So I went out to Death Valley. Why did I go there? Why does anybody? Because it has a cool name. If it was called some scorpions and bunch of fucking rocks, which is what it actually is, nobody would go. So don't go. I had decided I was done with counterculture. I was done with the regular culture. I was done with all. I would go where nobody would bother me and just try to figure myself out. Get a little peace and quiet. A month later, the Manson family moved in next door. For a while it was just a nice little guy named Paul and some girls living a few miles from my little shack. Seemed harmless. Then the whole family came in. Charlie too. They had already committed the murders at this point. It was big news, but nobody knew who did it. I surely didn't connect it to this band of weirdos next door. They seemed too stupid to pull off anything newsworthy. Just another bullshit commune. Once Charlie got there, the family seemed to spend most of their driving their dune buggies around, pretending to be the fucking African Corps. I mean, Charlie would put on a helmet with a swastika and lead them in maneuvers. I had never met racist Nazi hippies before, but there's a first time for everything. Some of them even talked about Uncle Adolf and how he knew the score, how he should have won the war. I was a mechanic in the army, so I helped them out with the buggies and got to know them a little. Everyone needs a job, I guess, thinking back now. It's damn funny where life sends you sometime. Slowly, their little philosophy trickled down to me. They thought America was on the verge of an apocalyptic race war. Blacks on white. Helter-skelter. The Watts riots in every city. That part actually seemed pretty plausible. I mean, you have to understand, in 1969, the country had been getting weirder and weirder, more and more violent every year. Nobody was quite sure when it would end. Nobody knew that in the 70s the counterculture would just kind of peter out into a bunch of fucking James Taylor albums. They said that they had come to the desert to find a hideout so they would be safe while the helter-skelter race war was going on. They said that somewhere out in the desert, there was bottomless pit full of wonders and treasures. In the Bible, Revelation speaks of the tree of life, which bears 12 kinds of fruit, one for every month. They said this tree was growing inside the bottomless pit, and would give them all the food they wanted while they waited out the war. When it was over, they said, they would emerge and Charlie would rule the world as the new Christ. So that part was a little less plausible. If anything, it was insane. And then I started hearing about the magical space vagina. Don't blame the messenger, this is just what they called it. You could blame me for repeating it, but I didn't wanted to leave out any facts. After I die there will be no one that will tell the story. I had become friends with Paul, who was actually a nice guy who just wanted to fuck the girls and get stoned and didn't really get into the whole Nazi thing. He said that they were searching for the entrance to the bottomless pit. He said that entrance would be made of flesh growing out of the rocks, like a giant vagina so big you could stroll right in. I told him he thought about that way too much. But he was serious. He said that the technology to turn rocks into flesh was from outer space, and its secrets had been taught to Charlie by Uncle Adolf. Until then, I had thought that Uncle Adolf was their name for Hitler. Slowly, as I learned more, I started to realize that they were talking about somebody who was still alive. Somebody they actually knew. They told me he was coming soon. Chapter 7 are psychological mirroring. This kind of psychological mirroring was exploited in the design of the flesh interfaces. When a human body is embedded in an interface, the independent, i.e. non-human, interface glands produce massive amounts of LSD which cause intellectual mutations, i.e. time fracturing along several dozen axes. Meanwhile, independent hormone regulators produce an emotional oscillation between two states. 1. Euphoria. 2. Terror. Thus we have the typical sound of an interface, alternating waves of giggling and screaming that move through the interface population, running along the length of the interface as the hormones travel along the independent conduits. These successive waves of giggling and screaming create a steady rhythm that washes over the traveler as they move through the interface. Natural empathetic responses, mirroring, prepare the traveler's body for the process of embrace. Chapter 8 A flashback about mother. When I was little, they took mommy away and put me with a new mommy in a smelly dark house. They said she was a real person, but I knew she wasn't. They had made her. Her face was made from pieces of animal. Pig cheeks. Hairy goat jaw. Old horse eyes. They sewed her together badly, and the seams were crusty. I hated her. Real mommy called me from underground. I opened the attic window at sundown and let the spring breeze flow in. I heard her song floating in on the cool air, soft singing from the grave. Chapter 9 A fleshy embrace. Watching the flesh interface process known as embrace is kind of like watching those Japanese subway groping videos. That was honestly the first thing I thought of when I watched it, but of course, I wasn't going to put that in the official report. You ever seen those videos? Oh, you wouldn't admit it if you had, right? It's a whole genre over there. Not the most progressive stuff in terms of gender equality, but compelling nonetheless. The videos start with a woman standing in the subway, minding her own business, when some guy starts feeling her up. She protests demurely and attempts to deflect his roaming hands. He persists. Other men on the subway, perhaps sensing her weakness, join in with the groping. A sort of group madness takes over the subway occupants. The men are transformed from ordinary travelers into an agglomerated mass of arms and hands and fingers, grabbing every part of the woman's body. The woman's attempts at protecting her personal space are always absurdly ineffectual, and soon she is divested of her clothing. Depending on the video's subgenre, a variety of acts ensue, most of which surely violate local transportation statutes. Embrace is kind of like that. That, combined with a school of piranhas stripping a live cow of its flesh. Funny how life imitate art. Chapter 10 My Time on the Island. Lying in the hold, listening to the bombardment, there is no sleep. The booming of the guns travels through the shivering metal of the ship. Hour after hour, without end, the arsenal of democracy rains down on the tiny island. What could it be like for the Japs huddled in their bunkers? Surrounded. Doomed. Do they know they have no hope? Do they expect death? Do they wish for it? Death. The island is death. Waiting for them. Ancient. Waiting since before they were born. Thousands of young men have crossed vast oceans to come to her, following paths they could have never foreseen. Thousands of young lives will converge on her shores. Converge and end. After 3 days of round-the-clock bombardment, a clear and bright morning. Whispers through the hold about problems with the shells. Many of them never exploded, disappeared in the air. There have been stories of bombers being cut in half. Of bomb crews emerging limbless from their planes. What is on the island? Some new kind of weapon? Something the Japanese have been saving until now? Just talk. The men feel the death out there, waiting on the island. The landing vehicles ride through the waves, and the Marines climb out onto beaches of ash, an alien surface, crumbling under their boots. There is no fire. No sound but the motors and the clinking of gear and the sergeants shouting, urging them on. No movement from the interior. Then screams. Bloody stumps. Men cut in half. But still no fire. How is there no fire? More men screaming. Groups of men on the ground, howling, bright red lumps where limbs had been. How? No sign of the Japs. No fire. No shells. More vehicles land. The beaches become a crowded, screaming nightmare. There is something here, something beyond their understanding. Invisible. Killing at will. Is it the island itself? A few men manage to advance up the steep beaches and across the rocks, but soon they are cut apart as well. Other men follow and advance farther. They have been trained to advance. Take the beach. Forward. Always forward. Slowly, the men find their way farther and farther into the island interior. Through horrible trial and error, they begin to understand. They don't speak of their discovery. They don't believe it. But their overwhelming will to go forward and their overwhelming fear of death teach them what their minds cannot accept, teach them a lesson about the island. They notice tracks through the ash and rock where there is no grass. These tracks are not foot trails, but deep tracks carved at strange angles, striated like dry streams, places where it seems the ground is simply missing. They realize they must avoid these tracks. If they step onto them, or let any part of themselves pass over the others, that part will disappear, whether it is their fingers or feet or limbs or even their heads. Sometimes parts of their bodies disappear even when they don't cross the tracks, and they realize that there are unseen tracks through the air, invisible boundaries they must not cross. If they lose a part of their bodies, the blood does not flow, but there is pain, pain beyond flames or knives or bullets. Pain unbearable. Unholy. Inhuman. There are screams all around them, of men who have accidentally run afoul of the invisible power. There is no time to understand this, to reason it out. They simply adapt. Moving carefully, holding out blades of wild grass or shirts or gear, probing, waiting for part of the object to disappear, then stopping, testing for a way forward. Sometimes they find it. Sometimes they are forced to turn back. In less than an hour, they have forgotten entirely about the artillery and snipers and bayonets. There are no soldiers. Only entrances to empty bunkers, abandoned pieces of artillery, some cut in half, but no enemy. They are playing a new game now, taught to them by some unseen teacher, playing it with total concentration. Playing and winning. The Marine wounded, with their strange unbleeding wounds, are taken away. Their screams fade. Orders from command are unchanged. Take the island. So they move forward. Up. Towards Mt. Suribachi. The mountain is shaped like a bowl. A dead volcano. They approach by various paths, each man following another, taking a narrow path of safety. Makeshift markers are set up to show their boundaries. A Marine turns and sees, floating like a butterfly, a severed human arm. It turns and floats away and disappears altogether. Minutes later, a disembodied pair of legs scrambles past. The Marines curse and speculate and even giggle, but keep moving forward. There is no time to understand. They expected to spend weeks taking the island. Now it seems that could have it in a couple hours. A shot rings out, the first shot since the confusion of the landing. A Marine is firing at the mountain. Others peer through their binoculars and spy a man sitting on the rim of the mountain. Simply sitting. Alone. Just a vague shape. Snipers are called in and they fire on him, but the island's air seems to swallow the bullets. The man is untouched. They press forward. The deadly tracks wind around them, growing more numerous. Some of the men find themselves at dead ends. One Marine slips and disappears entirely without so much as a shout. They come to the foot of the mountain. It is small but rugged and steep, and the lone man sits over them, looking down on them. They hear the sounds now, coming from the other side of the ridge, coming from within the giant bowl of the mountain. Human voices. Many of them. Thousands. The sounds of laughter, giggling and cackling and howling laughter. Like a wonderful party where somebody is telling a hilarious story. The Marines listen to it dumbfounded. Slowly the laughter fades, and there is a new sound, a strange rushing roar that quickly breaks apart into discrete sounds, screams, shouts, gasps, weeping, terror. The sound rises and rises, and the Marines shudder. This too fades and the laughter returns. And so these two sounds trade places over and over, fading in and out above the sound of the waves. A Marine trains his binoculars on the mountain again. The man is still sitting there. Japanese. Wearing a uniform. His head is floating several feet above his body. The body is in several pieces with lines of sunshine between them. His face, sweat dripping over the smooth eyelids, shows no emotion. Slowly, he raises his hand, as if wave to them, and his fingers float away from his palm. Sometimes when you are trying to tell your story, your mind wanders, at my age anyway. Chapter 11 My Nemesis. When novelist Philip K. Dick was 42 years old, his fourth wife left him. Lonely and devastated, he opened his home to whoever wanted to stay there. This being San Francisco in 1971, the house quickly became filled with drug users. Dick himself was heavily abusing amphetamines, eating pills by the literal handful and foregoing sleep for days. The mood in the house quickly became paranoid, and at one point, multiple occupants were sleeping with guns under their pillows. The house was broken into, and Dick suspected government involvement, thinking he had gotten too close to some kind of secret in one of his novels. He moved away shortly after. But his time at the house hadn't been all paranoia and firearms. There were also many good times. Dick was a mesmerizing conversationalist, with an easy command of facts and theories about art, religion, philosophy, and numerous esoteric subjects. He and his new friends, usually kids in their early 20s, would rap for hours and days about everything under the sun. He grew close to many of them. Many of them were runaways or otherwise clinging to the margins of society. After the break-in, Dick went to rehab and quit speed, but as time went on, many of his friends fell victim to the drugs. In the epilogue to A Scanner Darkly, a fictionalized account of this time, he wrote, "This has been a novel about some people who were punished entirely too much for what they did. They wanted to have a good time, but they were like children playing in the street. They could see one after another of them being killed, run over, maimed, destroyed, but they continued to play anyhow. We really all were very happy for a while, sitting around not toiling but just bullshitting and playing, but it was for such a terrible brief time, and then the punishment was beyond belief. Even when we could see it, we could not believe it. For a while I myself was one of these children playing in the street. I was, like the rest of them, trying to play instead of being grown up, and I was punished. We were forced to stop by things dreadful. In the grip of withdrawal, I read that epilogue many times. Read it and wept. I remember, after a week-long binge, lying in my bed, weeping, nightmares crowding my mind, my hands shaking, the mental suffering unbearable, thinking to myself, should I really be punished like this? What have I done that was so horrible? Was it so wrong to drink? To want to feel comfortable? To want to feel okay? To want to forget about things for a while? Was it so horribly wrong? Such a crime, that I should go through this mind-crucifying torment? But it wasn't really a matter of right and wrong. It was simply a matter of cause and effect. My brain had adapted to the inhibitory effects of alcohol, and once the alcohol had been removed, it had entered a state of hyperactivity. The adaptation had become a maladaptation. That was all. There was nothing out there administering this suffering as a punishment. My only crime had been knowing that this would happen and drinking anyways. I had been a child playing in the street. Dick wrote in his epilogue. In Greek drama they were beginning, as a society, to discover science, which means causal law. Here in this novel there is nemesis, not fate, because any one of us could have chosen to stop playing in the street. There was no magical fate causing my suffering. Just the impersonal cruelty of causal law. That was my only nemesis. Perhaps one day, they will invent a substance which prevents the neuroadaptation to alcohol, and we will be able to drink forever, like the Greek god Dionysus. We will drink and dance and laugh, and there will be no nightmares. We will be made children again, and we will play forever on a street where there are no cars. Until then, there will be suffering beyond belief. Chapter 12. Back to the island. They crawl up the mountain, bare hands on the sharp volcanic rocks. The sun beats down on them. It is a grueling test. The island has a secret that it doesn't want to reveal. They draw close to the man at the top of the mountain, keeping their guns trained on him. He has no weapon. His body is fragmented like an image in a broken mirror, various pieces floating without connection, the brightness of the sky shining between them, the blood of his insides bright red. His head is like a balloon floating several feet over the rest of him. "Hello, America," the head calls, breaking into a sickly smile. The whites of the eyes are clustered with red hemorrhages. Sweat rolls down the face. The Marines don't know how to respond. They ask if he's armed. The question strikes one of them as funny and he giggles. A tide of giggling comes from the other side of the ridge, behind the fragmented man. The giggling turns to screaming. "What's going on here? You alone?" a Marine asks. The man doesn't seem to understand. One of the Marines tries his basic Japanese. The man makes a sour face. "No, Nippon. Korea. Korea person," the man says, and a disembodied hand points to a nearby fragment of his chest. "Christian," the man says. He pulls a necklace out of his shirt. On the end of it is a small metal cross. A tiny suffering Jesus gleams in the sun. The Marine tries English again. "What's happening here?" "The devil came here." "What?" "The soldiers had built a gate." The child with the command. "I don't understand." A wide smile splits the Korean man's face, and he lets out a loud laugh, and the smile flees, and suddenly he is weeping. His emotions seem to follow the giggles and screams that come from inside the mountain. The Marines feel it too, the strange urge to laugh followed by a harrowing fear. The sound beyond the ridge rises, the screams becoming higher and louder. A wave of maniac giggling joins the screaming so that both sounds fill the air at once. An electric feeling touches the skin on the Marine's arms. They find their minds filling with strange, dark thoughts. Somewhere in a castle in Japan lies a mad god emperor who has sent his men across the ocean to defend his glorious empire with their blood. On the other side of the world lies the great humming factory called America, the heart of an empire of commerce, which once forced Japan to join the world in trade. Machines and flesh now flow along tendril-like courses, delivering goods and death, ensnaring the globe. The sun goes dark, like a light switch turning off. The Marines instinctively duck, then look up and gasp. Above them, extending miles into the sky, is an enormous metallic cylinder, filling the sky, blocking out the sun. It spins slowly above them, pieces of it flickering and disappearing like the image in a broken movie projector. In a day filled with madness, they find themselves confronted with something wholly beyond their capacity for surprise. They simply mutter soft curses and get closer to the ground. The earth seems to tremble with the sound of the screaming and laughing, which swirls like a storm all around them. Somewhere near the beach, a Marine pats another Marine on the back, interrupting his stunned gawking, and shouts something into his ear. The second Marine pats the man in front of him, and the message goes up the line like this until it reaches the Marines talking to the fractured man. Pull back. They are to withdraw from the island. The men do not question the order for a moment. They turn and crawl away from the Korean. Below them, the ashen island flashes with pieces of sunlight that manage to slip through the flickering cylinder. When they are almost at the foot of the mountain again, the man stands up and shouts something over the hideous screaming. The Marines cannot hear it and would not understand it anyways. The devil took Jesus went to the mountain to show him all the kingdoms of the world glory. If you fall down and worship me, saying, I will give it all to you. The Korean cried. Chapter 13. Do you really know how Michael Jackson died? Many people believe that Michael Jackson died due to propofol. Hell, I did in the beginning. Not so. He was murdered. He had actually been taking propofol nightly since around 1980, not in order to make himself sleep, but to suppress REM sleep. After several months of REM sleep suppression, the user becomes receptive, in other words, they enter the same state achieved by prolonged continuous immersion in aerosol LSD. The brain can physically restructure itself simply through thought. By reordering thought, one can physically reorder the brain. LSD or long-term propofol use makes the brain's neurostructure malleable. High-energy rays from outer space are able to penetrate the body, and these can lead to random mutations and cancers. And sometimes, they lead to changes that are not random at all. Changes which have been intentionally programmed. Changes designed to bring about civilization-level transformations. Michael Jackson was unaware of all of this. He merely knew that propofol allowed him to enter sort of waking dream state of heightened creativity. The side effects were horrifying paranoia and obsession, but he felt that he was strong enough to endure these side effects. The success of Thriller seemed to vindicate his theories about propofol, and unfortunately, he was damned by his own success. So how did he die? Through the lyrics of Another Part of Me and the vegetable part of Wanna Be Startin' Something, it was quite clear that he had become receptive and neuro-altered in line with Master Design 9. But he was considered to be minimal threat and even perhaps an asset until his mounting financial problems made him a liability. He was terminated, though I'm not sure of the exact means. Stay paranoid, my friends.